Welcome to the Bench to Brilliance podcast. My name is Kyle. A little bit about me, right? So, diehard sports fan. Been very, very avid on Twitter over the years, and getting in debates there over, especially football news. And right, this podcast mainly is going to be football. It's mainly going to be, the NFL and kind of some college scouting in there. But right, what it's really going to be is kind of highlighting a lot of players and news right around the league and teams and reacting week by week when the season starts. But, a lot of it too is going to be kind of trying to find the diamond in the rough players ahead of time and kind of giving, my insight onto who I think when I watch the film is, guys that may not be getting all the buzz, but kind of stand out to me directly, right? And so that's what the podcast is going to be, right? And kind of why Bench to Brilliance, I think kind of fits the name there perfectly, right? I'm trying to find those guys in a lot of aspects that are going to be guys that we don't look at, day one, right? Kind of if you would have been a year early on Cam Ward, right? And it said, hey, I think there's a lot of stuff there, but no one's talking about him yet. And, I think we see that every single year. Mendoza this year comes out of nowhere. I think, we see that every single year in the draft. And I think it's something so important to touch on because a lot of times we fall in love with the big names and who you see playing in the championship every single year, but we don't talk enough about the guys at the smaller schools or talk about the guys that may be in a crowded room, right? And a lot of times those guys go on to have great careers, right? We all know the story, obviously, of Tom Brady and no one expecting anything from him, but, there's some scouts out there that thought that he was, that guy. And I want to be kind of in that realm there. So a little bit about me before this, right? Went to school for, sports communications, did kind of some PR stuff there in college. And then since then, have just been trying to find a way to get back into it. So thought, with the passion and love I have for scouting and kind of the combine and the draft time especially, what better time than right now as we get, kind of head on into that, that season that we're getting into now with the draft and the combine and all that stuff that goes into it, and free agency as well. And, I think our first topic here is really going to be, right, kind of my big board. And it's going to be, our top 5 guys, right? Try to make it quick here for us. I can rant about, these guys all day long. And who I think the top 5 guys in the draft are. And I think really when you look at it at the end at your big board, it's going to be different for everybody, right? It's what do you value, right? I'm somebody that I value guys that love football. I value guys that, play hard every single play in and play out. And really at the end of the day, measurables are important, right? We need to see that. That's what the combine's there for. But at the end of the day, cut on the film, who plays. That's what matters. And I think, my top 5 guys, every single one of these guys fit that mold to a T. We'll get right into it. My first guy, Caleb Downs. I think Caleb Downs, to me, he's the number 1 player on my big board. And I understand there's not the wow factors there that you look for in a lot of guys, right? And a lot of times we fall in love with the traits and what can be, and I understand that, and I understand why GMs draft that way, and we look for traits. But I understand he doesn't have the wow factor, the traits that a lot of people look for. But at the end of the day, the instincts, the football IQ, I think is second to none when it comes to anybody else in the draft. The guy is, he's so versatile, and he's not going to run a 4.3 40. He's going to run probably a 4.4, 4.5. But at the end of the day, it's like you cut on the film, all the guy does is make plays. He's, I think, very good in coverage. He's a sure tackler, in my opinion. You put him in the box, he's versatile as all get out. I think he kind of parallels to a similar impact to what Eamon had this year with the Seahawks. And, right, I know no one's putting Eamon as the number 1 player in the draft class, and I understand that. And I think Caleb Downs is obviously maybe a tier above. But I think a similar impact, right? You look at what Eamon was able to do for the Seahawks, kind of be that chess piece, what Kyle Hamilton's able to be for the Ravens, right? Where he's that chess piece back there, and he's able to allow them to do so much, and he makes such a big impact every single game. And I think you see that with Caleb Downs, right? It's the instincts are just at a different level, and he's such a sound football player. And I think at the end of the day, if we take away position importance and all that stuff, we just look at best football player, who are they going to be, plug and play day one, and prolonged in their career. I think that's Caleb Downs to a T, right? I think you're going to be able to line him up in the nickel at strong safety. I think you'll be able to put him as a nickel backer in the pass game. And I just think that versatility allows you to do so much on the defensive side of the football. But I also think, day one, you're getting a guy that makes an impact right away and is a starter in the league, for many years to come. Beyond that, right, I think my second guy there is Ruben Bain. And again, it's going to be a guy that the measurables are not going to love. Now, he's strong as all get out, absolute dog, but, right, the arm length that we all keep hearing about and talking about. And I understand the arm length concerns, right, because even on the offensive side of the ball, we saw what happened with Will Campbell this last year and kind of the struggles that he had towards the playoffs. And some of that may have been injury related, but at the end of the day, we're all going to look back at the arm stuff and what was coming out there in the draft. And I get it, right? It makes sense, okay? At times, edge rusher with short arms is going to get jammed up. He's going to get, maybe beat to the point and all that stuff. And I understand it. But you look at a guy like Ruben Bain and you look at, even the playoff stuff. And there was the game before the championship game in college. Ruben Bain, he had this play where it's like you can't deny him. He lines up even the widest I've ever seen a defensive end line up ever, and he just straight up plows through a guy. That first step is just insane. His strength is insane, and it just seems like every time you need that guy to make a play, he's making a play. And for that reason, right, I love a guy that's a dog. I love a guy that, learned adversity there, learned from a guy like, Jason Taylor, who I think when you go through coaching and what you're looking for in young guys is who they've been coached by, right? And I think it doesn't get any better with learning the edge position than from a guy like Jason Taylor, who, right, obviously did it at a Hall of Fame level, but, Ruben Bain was just fantastic over the last 2 years, and I really think this last year especially. So for that reason, right, I just think Ruben Bain does everything very well. He's an excellent pass rusher. I think he's very good against the run, probably a little underrated against the run. But I think he's a guy that, you can even move inside and at times and be kind of versatile with. And I think Ruben Bain's a 10, 11 sack per season kind of guy at the minimum. I think you can see, higher ceiling than that as well because of how good I think the player is independently other than just the measurable stuff that we all look at as well. Number 3 is the guy that everybody wants to talk about, right? It's going to be Fernando Mendoza. I think Mendoza, he's a guy that I kind of found end of last year, early this year that I know I was bringing up to some people and talking to people about there that, I really liked Mendoza's game. I'm not the guy that falls in love with the flashy quarterback play, right? Obviously, Mahomes is a guy. Caleb Williams this last season, when it comes to the improv stuff, was amazing. And I understand, the arm talent and all that stuff. And I get it. And, right, Mendoza doesn't have a lot of that. Now, what he does have is he's 6'6" and probably going to weigh in around 230, 240, I imagine there, if he does it at prior to the pro day. And, I just think with Mendoza, you get a guy that's just such a leader. You don't have to worry about him on and off the field. And that's the biggest thing, right, when coming into the league for so many rookies is this going to be a distraction for him once he gets paid? I don't think you have to worry about that at all with Mendoza. Obviously, it's kind of getting a little bit different now with the NIL time, but still, right, when they get in the league, you still worry about the character and right, all that stuff. You don't worry about that with Mendoza. He's as solid as they come. And, I know McShay talks about, right, the Mendoza line all the time. It's just this guy that's just like, yeah, he does everything good. Everything is just good. And it scares me because in a lot of ways, he kind of reminds me of a Kirk Cousins-ish player. But I do see flashes of really good stuff in Mendoza. Now, like a lot of people, and I think what we're starting to hear more and more about, especially before, Dante Moore had decided to go back to college, is some of the stuff you worry about with Mendoza. When he gets sped up, when there's guys coming at him, it seems there's an instance of panic. And you do worry about that in the NFL. You worry about that, obviously, if he goes number 1 to the Raiders. It's not the greatest offensive line by any means. And is that going to be a problem, right? Now, I think with the right stuff around him, you could see a guy that has a lot of success. I think, right, we've seen guys that, like Kirk Cousins, right? He's mobile. He can move. He's not the twitch stuff. He's not going to go left to right very quickly. But you get him down, downhill. He'll pick up first down yardage, and he'll be a threat with his legs at times. Obviously, he's a pocket passer for the most part, right? And I think, like I said, I'm not trying to be negative on Mendoza. I think there's a lot of stuff that we really can look at and like, right? I think Kirk Cousins is really a great middle level for him. Now, I think there's a high level he could get to, right? I do. I think, you always want to get into comps. I think, super high-end level would be a less big Ben Roethlisberger, a guy that really can pick you apart there in the pocket. Now, doesn't have the arm strength, so maybe not the greatest thing there. But I think Mendoza can be a very, very good quarterback in the league. I think he's got the ability to. He's very tough. He's a tough kid, right? I mean, we saw that in the championship game. The shots he was eating in the championship game were insane. And I do think he's got some generational tools, right? He's a very accurate. I think the leader that you're going to get straight out of college is some of that generational stuff that people talk about too, right? I know Pat McAfee earlier today was calling him a generational talent. And why I disagree with maybe some of the arm talent and maybe the athleticism when it comes to the quarterback, I don't think any of that's necessarily generational. I do think the individual as a whole, I think it's a guy that you can really sell yourself on. It's somebody that I was selling myself on early in the process when the season had started and I was kind of looking at quarterbacks for the Dolphins myself, right? I'm a Dolphins fan, diehard Dolphins fan, and I think Mendoza was one of the guys that I looked at, other than just the Miami connection for him, but also the fact that you look at a guy that just seems to get it done, right? There's some of the plays this season, the first game there against Oregon, very impressive game. And I think, we look so much at the measurables for a guy, and I know I've harped on that a little bit there, but I think at the end of the day, you cut the film on. Mendoza's a gamer. He plays well. There's stuff we're going to have to clean up with any rookie, and I think it's the same with Mendoza, right? It's getting him more comfortable, I think, under duress. But I think, he was able to do that at times against Miami, right? And I think that, that fourth quarter when, he put the team on his back and had that Heisman and that, first overall pick defining moment where he takes those shots and gets a touchdown. I think we can see more of that from Mendoza in the future. I think you just, get him in the right system, coach the guy the right way. Don't expect fireworks day one. He's not that type of player. Develop him. Keep developing him. I think you will get a very good starter in the league with him. And maybe, the potential for a top 5, top 10 starter in the league there as well. I think the next player here for me is Jeremiah Love. Now, Jeremiah Love is somebody that I don't know that I would put him above Ashton Genty, but I think when it comes to prospects, he's like Caleb Downs to me. It's like, tell me where he's bad. He's good in the pass game. He's a good blocker. He's a very good running back, obviously, with all the skills that he can do there. And, I think he's going to be the ultimate weapon for a team. And I know it's the funny thing on Twitter right now that all he does is spin and hurdle every single play, but hey, it works. And to me, it's Jeremiah Love is a guy that it's like, if you are at a luxury, right? I would love him for the Bears. I just think like if you're a team that doesn't have a ton of holes and you're kind of, maybe a few pieces away on the offensive side of the football, you go ahead and put Jeremiah Love on that offense and like your offense just got that much better. He's not going to go, I think, in the top 10, but I think when we get to that 15, 20 range, you're going to get a guy that I think is a top 5 player in the draft. And I wouldn't be mad about it at all. I think the guy is absolutely, top tier level when it comes to NFL, recruits and kind of scouting. And I think Jeremiah Love's ceiling in the NFL is extremely high. And the guy is, an electric player. I remember 2 years ago, watching the Notre Dame playoff games and just being like, hey, this guy is just as good as Ashton Genty. And I may have, jumped the gun on that a little bit, but I still think Jeremiah Love is a tremendous player, and I think he's going to have a great success in the NFL as well. I think he'll instantly be a top half running back in the league, and I think his ceiling could put him in that top 5 conversation there later down the road as well. When we look at kind of the last player there, really it's going to be Bailey out of Texas Tech. I'm a massive fan. I think when we look at him and kind of he's going to be the traits guy to me. Right, I know Orville Reese and David Bailey and Ruben Bain and Kendrick Folk there as well. I know we kind of all have the debate there of when those guys should go. To me, David Bailey he's built like a freak. When you watch him, I mean he's got the ability where he played in a 2-point stance and a 4-point stance there at Texas Tech. Really, the thing I liked most about watching his film is ultra explosive. Right, and that's kind of the thing that everybody keeps talking about with him too is. He's a guy that jumps off the film. When you put on, cut on the film, he jumps off the tape, right? And his game early on is going to be all about, getting off the ball and winning early in the down. And that's part of that first step there and being ultra explosive. But I do think he has, some, pass rush skills there as well, right? He's not just a speed guy, right? Bain at first is going to be a lot of power. He's going to be a power rusher at first. I think he's going to get a deeper and deeper bag as he goes in and maybe work more on flexibility and see if, that can kind of expand there. But a guy like David Bailey, like The spin move that he has, that sudden inside spin move, is very, very impressive. He does show at times the ability to kind of put speed to power as well, where, I think Bane's kind of the opposite. Bane's so powerful. I think he can kind of use his power to make up for that speed. I think overall Bailey, has areas to address, but the ability that he has, as a raw prospect, I think is one that is going to entice teams a lot to really look at drafting there. And he's a guy that I think is going to be drafted more off of traits than, what we saw necessarily production. Not that production was bad, but David Bailey, when you look at the combine stuff and when you look at some of the film, it's the guy's a freak. I mean, he absolute freak of nature there. And I think it's somebody that, is really going to impress scouts here when we get to the combine as well. And, to me, I'm all in on him when it comes to overall, at the draft. And for me, he's a top 5 guy on my board. Now, getting into kind of some guys that I love, my guys, right, that aren't necessarily some of the highest predicted guys in the draft, right? This guy, I see him predicted kind of, and right, so this is really going to be my favorite topic we talk about, is the sleepers and my guys, right? It's going to be kind of what this whole podcast is about, right? Bench to brilliance. And I think it's all about finding the guys that maybe are, still thought of as first round picks, but may not be talked about enough, but then also finding guys that may not be, considered top guys at all, and, predicted later round draft picks, and guys that I think could be really successful in the league there. And kind of starting off is going to be Omar Cooper Jr. Now, the wide receiver from Indiana, and I can't remember who talked about it early on. It may have been McShay as well, but he had brought up Omar Cooper Jr. as kind of, there's some similarity there to Jarvis Landry. As a diehard Dolphins fan, I can't look past that. He's just got this ability of catch ball, make people miss, and just when you cut on the film, he's a fun player to watch. There was that back of the end zone, last play of the game, touchdown he had for Indiana earlier in the season, maybe on the mid-season point, and it was an impressive throw by Mendoza, but it was a super impressive catch to me by Omar Cooper Jr. And I think he's a guy that he makes combat catches look really easy. He can pluck the ball and stays grounded through the catch on crossers, which I think is a great way for young guys to kind of, get playing time early on in the league, is being tough. It's kind of how, Jarvis Landry got, playing time early on for the Dolphins as well, was being fearless across the middle of the field, and that's what he does at a very, very high level. And to me, I think the world of him. I think he's going to have a fantastic career. I think he's somebody that I wish he'd fall, because I wish the Dolphins could draft him there late in the second. But right, I understand it too, right? He's an absolute freak of a player. Kind of my next one there, that I'm going to touch on too, is I'm a Ty Simpson guy, probably more than other people. And the only reason I'm bringing him up here is because, it's fascinating to me that nobody wants to put him in the first round. And I know I've seen it to the Rams and occasionally the Steelers, but you see a lot more of him going in the second round. Ty Simpson is a pretty good player. If you like Mendoza, and I understand the measurables are there with Mendoza, right? He's got the 6'6", 6'5" frame. He's 230, 240. So I understand that. But go watch Ty Simpson in the beginning of the year before he was injured. He did it all for Bama this year, and it got him injured. And I understand the injury. We don't want to have injury concerns. I understand that. I'm a Dolphins fan. I understand injury concerns, but I think you watch a guy like Ty Simpson, the ability that he has as a pure passer, I think it's very high. I'm not going to hold the college football playoffs on him because, again, I think he was playing some of that injured. I also like the confidence that he has of coming out this year. I also think it's smart because it's not a very deep quarterback class. If Dante Moore went back, he were going to be the clear-cut second quarterback in the draft, in my opinion. But I like Ty Simpson. I think he's tough. I think when you watch the beginning of the year, he looked a lot bigger than he kind of finished, and I think the season kind of had a toll on him. But again, I think a lot of that was he was playing on a not very good Bama team, and I think he was overcompensating for a lot of it, kind of having to do it by himself. But with Ty Simpson, he's just a guy I really like. I think he's very accurate. I think he's got more athleticism than people want to give him credit for. I like his legs and what he can do in the run game. I think he has a pretty good arm. It's not electric. It's not close to Mahomes or Herbert, but I think he's got maybe the same arm as Mendoza for a much smaller quarterback, if not maybe, in my opinion, potentially a little bit bigger of an arm. But I'm a Ty Simpson guy. I think he's just a gamer. and I'm a big fan of him overall. I think the third guy for me there, and he seems to be the one receiver that I'm not hearing any first round hype on, and I'm shocked because of the size and because of kind of how he did at the Senior Bowl. It's going to be Malachi Fields from Notre Dame, and I think Malachi Fields from Notre Dame, right? He's a freak. I can't remember if he's 6'4", 6'5", but he's big. Every time you watch him play, he doesn't seem slow. It's not kind of like watching Keon Coleman where the separation seemed to be an issue. But he's a monster when it comes to contested catches. Now, no, I'm not comparing him to Mike Evans, but I think he has, that ability of where, hey, he might not always be able to separate at a high level, but you throw the ball up to him, it's kind of similar to Keon Coleman in my opinion. You throw the ball up to him and just let him go after it. And I think some of Keon Coleman's issues in the league have been he hasn't necessarily been used correctly in Buffalo. I think some of it is also on him as well. But I think Malachi Fields is just a guy that I'd put a lot of stock in when it comes to the second or third round. If he falls to the third, I think you take him if you need anything at receiver, and you just see what happens because the guy's got unreal talent when it comes to pure size. And I don't know. I'm big on him when it overall. 50-50 balls, like I said, he's never going to lose those in the red zone or down the field. Absolute bully when the ball's in the air. I really think he kind of fits that almost like what we looked for in a lot of guys kind of early 2010s, kind of that power forward role down the field. I think Malachi Fields fits that perfectly, and I think for a team like the Dolphins here, they need to get bigger at receiver. I think Malachi Fields would be a great fit there in the third round. Kind of going on there, downward, I think Zachariah Branch is kind of my fourth guy that I want to talk about there as a sleeper. And a guy, again, that probably, predicted in the second and third round on a lot of people's boards. When you watch Georgia, and it was in the playoffs, the game that Georgia got knocked out, but when you watch that game against Georgia, Zachariah Branch is a dog. I mean, the guy, I think you put him as kick returner or punt returner, he just does things with the ball in his hands. Compact slot receiver overall, but he's got very, very good speed, very good quickness. A lot of his throws at Georgia came from quick throws. I think you could see more down the field crossers in the league as well. But I think, Branch has just that ability that we look for all the time in the NFL with guys that can just make something out of nothing. He's got massive big play ability, and, I think it's going to attract him to a lot of NFL offensive coordinators. He's a guy to me that I think the Chargers and Mike McDaniel would be all over. They need explosiveness at wide receiver. Ladd McConkey's as solid as they come. I really like Palmer. We'll see what happens with Keenan Allen. But I think when you look at a guy like Zachariah Branch, he's just a guy. He's a gamer. I think you just put the ball in his hands and let's see what happens. He even, kind of impressed me at times with being able to use his body on contested catches. I think he's a guy that, plays bigger and stronger than he is, and obviously, but I think we're going to see a lot of catches and screens, slants, and quick outs early on in his career. But don't be surprised there too if you line him up in the slot and just let him burn guys downfield, because I think he has that ability of kind of being a sneaky gadget type player there as well, but also punt returner, kick returner, day one in the league. I think he's just a guy that's just special with the ball in his hands. Just give him the ball and let's see what happens, because I think good things do happen when he has the ball in his hands. My last guy is, going to be somebody that, I wanted to touch on last because I have a lot to say. And when I'm looking at the rest of the quarterback class, because we know somebody else is going to get drafted higher than they probably should, and we're going to take guys that, at the quarterback position that, we don't necessarily love, but it's the quarterback position. And let's be honest, the NFL has a quarterback play problem. Most teams, even if you have a quarterback that's young and you feel good about, will be looking for a quarterback again in the next 5 years, 3 years down the road. I think a guy like Drew Aller still intrigues me. And I understand the league has given up on Drew Aller. A lot of people have given up on Drew Aller. I get why, and I understand why. But I think with Drew Aller, there's a lot of stuff there that you still can develop. And I understand that, right? That's been the big thing for Drew through his career is develop. We're still developing. And, I watch a lot of the McShay show. I know McShay isn't necessarily the biggest fan because there's times, and he's right? When he has to make downfield throws and guys are running away from him, it's not always the cleanest throw. I don't know what that is, and I agree with McShay on that. But I also think he's still 21 years old. still has an absolute cannon of an arm. 6'5", 230. I think he plays closer to 240, 245. But, I'm excited to see him throw out the combine. I want to see what he looks like coming off this injury. I want to see him move a little bit off that injury as well. I think Drew Aller is just a guy still that I think there's a lot there. I think you need him, he's very accurate at times. And there's accuracy at times there that is very impressive. There's throws that he makes that you go, okay, he's getting it. It's starting to come together. And then I also understand there's that throw at the end of the Oregon game where it's like, dude, this was a moment for you to take that step, and what happened? But then again, there's the Michigan game from last year where he looked like he was taking that next step. And I don't know, overall for Drew Aller, right, I think he's a guy that there's so much potential there. And I hate to keep falling in love with the potential of Drew Aller because I've gotten burned by it through his entire college career here. But he has, a lot of those traits. I think he's a decent mover at the quarterback position. He's big. You're going to be able to use him in sneaks. You're going to be able to use him, short yardage opportunities there. But I think he's a decent mover too, right? I think, straight speed, he's kind of like Mendoza. Straight speed, I think you're going to be fine. The twitch, side-to-side movement, it's not great. I like his pocket presence at time. There's great signs of being able to avoid pressure in the pocket, evade pressure in the pocket, and kind of step up and move. He had this player in the Oregon game as well where he stepped to his right and then climbed the pocket back left, and it was the right stuff you want to see there. His footwork is usually pretty solid. When he throws from a solid base, it's perfect. If he gets off of his spot, he has the arm strength to be able to do it. It's cleaning up the rest of the mechanics to be better off platform. Once he's able to do that, I think you're going to see, Drew Aller take a lot of steps too. To me, again, he's a 21-year-old kid. He's got a lot of talent. I don't think you're going to have an issue with Drew Aller off the field. I don't know of any that ever came up off the field with Drew Aller. Get him in your system if you're a team that doesn't need a quarterback. I would love if the Rams drafted him and just held him for a couple years. I think, let him sit behind Stafford. Let him sit behind some guys and see what happens. I think he's got that ability that you can't teach a lot of those measurables. And like I said earlier, I'm not a guy that falls in love with measurables usually, but with a guy like Drew Aller, it's there. The talent is there and the stuff is there, and you can't help but deny, right? He's nowhere close athletically to Josh Allen, but he looks like Josh Allen to me. He looks like a young Josh Allen, and for that reason, he's just a guy that I really like. I think he's got, just the skills there to become a very, very good player in the league. And I'm excited to see overall how he becomes and who he becomes when we get him in the league and get him in the right system. I think getting him in the right system, I think that was a big thing too. I don't think Penn State ever had the teachers or coaches that were great developers either, right? Obviously, James Franklin got fired for a reason. I want to see Drew Aller in a program where they invest in him and work with him and get him in the right spot. And he works with NFL, quarterback coaches, and I think you can see a lot of future for Drew Aller. I think he's a guy that has potential to be a starter in the league. I want to see it. I need to see more of it, but I'm not going to give up on Drew Aller yet. That's going to be my 5 guys there that, I'm kind of want to talk about the sleepers now. Now, as we get into the next episode here, as we get into more film, more combine stuff here, as we go, I am going to bring up other guys there that I think later round, 6th round, 5th round, 7th round guys, maybe even some undrafted guys that I think I'd be very interested in talking about. And so I'm going to bring those up here, in future episodes for us. But I just wanted to overall kind of touch on some of the big names here for the combine. Some guys that I don't think are getting enough attention right now. Maybe mid-round guys that I think could be going even earlier than we expect. But also just touch on some of my guys, some of the guys that I really like here in the draft, and overall kind of give a future insight or vision board for what this podcast will be here going forward. I appreciate anybody who tuned in to watch this. Obviously, I'm not expecting many, but I appreciate it nonetheless, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.